Is your GOAT rapper, and give me the best explanation you possibly can for this said GOAT rapper.
So I was recently featured in a NFR video, and I want to start off by saying that I really do appreciate them, including my portion of the debate inside of the video. And I really appreciate what they're doing. I really like that they're incorporating the community and they're, getting active in that way. But I have a couple gripes with the video, particularly the way that it was structured, the way it was edited, and also kind of the direction that the debate went. I felt like we kind of got bogged down into a Kendrick versus Lupe debate when the whole purpose of the debate was to talk about Lupe or whoever you had in as the GOAT and making your case as to why they're the GOAT rather than, oh, let's do a rapper versus rapper kind of thing. You know what I mean? But either way, I don't want to address a couple points that I made. And yeah, I'd just like to elaborate on a couple different things that had happened. So,
Okay. Well, in the little document that I submitted, I said that the GOAT was Lupe Fiasco.
Okay.
And I think, honestly, I think if you're talking about like objectively, I think he's objectively the GOAT.
Why
I
is
think
this?
I think he has two undisputed classics. Like these are certified, which is Food and Liquor and then
W.
The Cool.
Okay, W.
Mhm.
Both W.
And
Yeah,
then
I agree.
and then I think arguably he has another classic with Tetsuo and Youth.
Okay.
Mm,
That one's a bit more
yeah.
debatable, but I'd still say no to that. But okay, we'll say two
Amazing album.
classics.
I don't know about classic.
one of the first things that they had put in the video, and one of the first things that I said was that I thought that Lupe was the objective GOAT. And I started going down what classics he had, as you guys saw. And one of the things I said was that Tetsuo and Youth was a classic. Well, arguably it was a classic. And the reason why I said arguably, and the reason why I said what I said was because I didn't mean classic in the traditional sense. If we're talking about classics, you have to talk about what you mean when you say classic. Typically, when somebody says classic, you're talking about what the masses deem to be a classic. So a lot of times, a classic album does not necessarily consist of a track record or a track list of songs that are perfect with no skips or whatever the case may be. Rather, classic albums typically are more so albums that are revered and are infamous for whatever reason, not necessarily albums that have zero skips. And so you can have an album that is a classic that still has, a few misses on it. The reason why I said that Tetsuo Youth is arguably a classic is because while it doesn't have the uh, approval of the masses necessarily like a classic necessarily needs to have, it is one of those albums that I feel, even though without having that kind of stamp on it from the public and from the people, that it's a classic, it still is an album that has the quality that a classic would have in it. And so that's really what I was trying to argue there. Not necessarily that it was a classic, in the traditional sense, but more that it's a classic in the sense of it has the quality that can match up to classics.
I take it to a Kendrick Lamar. Would you say To Pimp a Butterfly and Good Kid, Mad City are better albums than, let's say, Food and Liquor and The Cool?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about personal preference, I would take Lupe's albums, but if you're talking about objectively speaking, GKMC and TPAP have more critical acclaim, so I guess most people would probably say those two. But if you're asking me my personal opinion, which is why it's hard to argue about classics, because if you have two artists and they both have classics,
Yes.
it's hard to really debate which classic is better. If they're both classic, it just kind of comes down to personal preference, what you think is better.
The reason I said that was to say this. If you wanted to, you could take two artists that both have classics. You could take classic A versus classic B and put them up against each other. And if you asked and went around and asked people, hey, what are your thoughts on these classics? Which one is better? And somebody said, I think Classic A is better than Classic B. Most people wouldn't think that that's like a ridiculous take to make. And then and then inversely, if somebody said, actually, I think Classic B is better than Classic A, again, it's the same thing. Most people wouldn't think that that's a crazy take. Why? Because they're both classics. You know what I mean? Once you've reached that classic status, it's kind of hard to argue definitively which one's better. Even if most people say, I think GKMC is better than Food and Liquor, for instance. The point is, if somebody said Food and Liquor was better, you would understand. And if that's the case, then that implies relativity. That implies that these albums are close. But we'll get into that with the next point because I actually touched on this a little bit more and they actually included it in the video.
Point, which is that the point is, if you can argue that they're at least close, then I think that kind of puts Lupe above, in the sense that even if you say that, okay, well, I think that they're close, but I think GKMC is better, or I think T-Pap's close to maybe one of Lupe's other classics, but I think that, T-Pap is better, even if you say that.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, Lupe has more albums than Kendrick, on top of having classics that are relative to Kendrick's best work.
Right. And so that is ultimately one of the, I think that's honestly the killer for, anybody trying to argue that Kendrick is better than Lupe. Because the reality of it is, and I think that every kind of hip hop fan knows this, the main reason why people put Kendrick so high on the list is because of his catalog. That's the main reason. He has GKMC and he has The Pimper Butterfly. Those are the two big heavy hitters. Now, of course, Damn exists as well. Don't get me wrong, and Damn's a great album. It's a classic album in the eyes of a lot of in the eyes of many. But the reality of it is like we know what we're talking about when we're talking about Kendrick. And so the reality of it is, and the reason why this is the defeater is because Lupe has more work. And it's not just about quantity. This isn't just a quantity argument. They cut out their response to that. But in their response, they were talking about how, well, we don't have to make it just about quantity and all this stuff. But it's not just about quantity. The reality of it is Lupe has, arguably the same amount of classics that Kendrick has. And his classics are good enough to where they are relative to, at least relative to Kendrick's classics, meaning that one could argue that Lupe's classics are better. So then, where else can we look to determine who has a better catalog? It has to be the albums outside of their catalog. And the albums outside of their catalog, you find that not only does Lupe have more albums than Kendrick outside of their classic projects, but then he has the quality to match said projects that Kendrick has dropped as well. So, and I didn't get to make this in the video, I didn't get to go too in depth with it, but that right there is pretty much my point. I can look at an album like Tetsuo and Youth, and Tetsuo and Youth, in my opinion, I've got that album over every album Kendrick has ever released outside of his classics. So if you want, we can go album for album, we can go down the line. Tetsuo and Youth is better than Overly Dedicated. It's better than Section 80. It's better than Mr. Brown the Big Steppers. It's better than GNX. And if you want to throw in Untitled Unmastered, it's better than that too. So it's not just a quantity, discussion. We're talking about quality too. Tetsuo Youth is arguably, competing with Kendrick's entire catalog outside of his classics. And then you give Lupe Samurai, which is a great album. Then you give him Drill Music in Zion, which is another great album. Then you give him Drogas Wave, which is extremely conceptual and another great album with songs like Wave Files and King Nas on there. I mean, I don't understand how we can even make the argument that Kendrick's catalog is even better when you break it down in that way. Now, I didn't get to go entirely in depth with it like how I am in this video, but ultimately, that right there was like one of my biggest points that I had made against, Kendrick having a better catalog.
As just a complete artist and rapper and MC, I think that Kendrick kind of did what Lupe wanted to do, attempted to do, and kind of failed at, which was like weaving in like these very deep messages, deep subjects, speaking about like serious topics from oppression to so much more, but did it for the masses and was able to translate it to the masses. I think that when it comes to the range of the type of songs that a Kendrick can make, when it comes to his hook game, when it comes to the different types of songs and concepts that he's able to tackle, I think he's just a more all around artist.
You can look at Lou's face too. I don't know what it is. He just looks like he's exhausted in this video. I had no idea that he looked like that. But yeah, he just looks like, I don't know, like he's tired because I feel like low key that debate wasn't that long, but I feel like I was low key cooking them because we had a couple exchanges. But in this part of the video, again, there was a commentary saying that he felt like the video ended kind of abruptly, and I agree. And the reason why it ended abruptly was because I had a rebuttal for that, and it got cut out. But basically, my rebuttal to that was this: Kendrick being able to reach the masses is irrelevant. We're talking about who is a better rapper, not who can touch the masses more. At one point, Bad Baby was able to reach the masses. So what? Are we now going to say that she should be in the conversation for one of the GOATs? It doesn't matter. And so the reality of it is, it's like he's saying that, well, I think Kendrick, was able to weave in these deep messages and did it for the masses. But the thing is, it's like Lupe didn't fail at doing that. He did do that. He has massive hits. He has radio records. He has radio play. He has songs that have charted. He's done the same thing. The only difference is Kendrick was able to do it for a longer period of time. But guess what? And I even said this in my rebuttal in the video that they cut out. Kendrick had more people backing him. You got to understand that when it comes to reaching the masses, it's not always about quality. In fact, it hardly has to do with quality. Now, whether or not you have the longevity to continue to do it tends to fall on quality a little bit more. But in terms of actually just reaching the masses, that a lot of times doesn't have to do with quality. You have algorithms and, kind of, uh, and primarily the biggest point that I wanted to make in that video and that I did make in that video, just not as in depth as I am right now. But Kendrick had like a bunch of people backing him. He had Dr. Dre, who is widely considered to be the greatest producer of all time. He had Pharrell on his tracks as well. Again, one of the greatest producers of all time. And he had full albums produced by individuals like that. He had Thundercat, again, he's a massive name in the production industry as well, in terms of, with beat making and things like that. He had guys like Snoop Dogg, who is massive. Snoop Dogg is one of the biggest, just figures, right, that we know of. And he had guys like Snoop Dogg passing him the torch on the stage. Even just with the artists that he was working with. He was working with Mary J. Blige. He had Drake endorsing him at one point and even got Drake on his album. And while Drake wasn't, the biggest artist of all time at the time, Drake was still massive. And Drake had the likes of Lil Wayne and Nicki Minaj backing him, who were massive at the time. And so the reality of it is it's like, you know, yeah, I mean, Lupe had like what? He had a co-sign, or he got signed by Jay-Z or whatever it was. And, again, Lupe had great producers on his side. But even if you look at something like Food and Liquor, he had what? Soundtrack? You know what I mean? Soundtrack's a phenomenal producer, but it's like, that's not even touching, Dre or Pharrell. And so you got to remember that a lot of times when people touch the masses, it doesn't have to do necessarily with the quality of their music. And I think that they should have probably put a little bit more, because I'm seeing a lot of people in the comments talking about, well, not a lot of people, but I see a couple people in the comments saying, oh, I feel like he could have defended or debated for Lupe a lot better. But the whole video got cut. I mean, literally, they took out everything. I can hardly remember everything that was even said in the video, because there was a lot said in such a short amount of time, and then they cut it down and they made it even shorter. But I had a lot of arguments as to why I felt like Lupe was over everybody. I wanted to actually get into, because I have some hot takes. I wanted to get into how I believe Biggie is not over Lupe at all, not even close. Like, I don't think, Biggie is even close to Lupe. And I actually want to get into why I think Biggie, and I don't mean to just shit on Biggie, but like why Biggie shouldn't even be in the top 10. I don't think Tupac is touching Lupe at all. And yeah, I wanted to just go in there and just talk about why I think a lot of these artists that people consider to be some of the greatest just don't stand a chance against Lupe in terms of catalog, in terms of lyricism, in terms of flow, in terms of all these things. But I'll go ahead and I'll save that for another video. Save all that for a different video, different time. For now, I'm just here to recap the video, and maybe they'll actually release the rest of the footage. I knew I should have recorded that, but that's pretty much all I have to say about the video.